Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America. I'm your host, Anthony Moreno. During World War II, the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. Before the bombs were dropped, the first atomic bomb explosion took place right here in southern New Mexico. The Trinity site explosion was part of the top secret Manhattan Project. The secret test led to a lot of confusion here in southern New Mexico when the bomb exploded in the early morning of July 16, 1945. A new book shares stories from locals in the area who witnessed and recalled the explosion. Elva Österreich is a journalist and author of the book, The Manhattan Project Trinity Test, Witnessing the Bomb in New Mexico. She joins us now to share more. Elva, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us and talk about your book. Congratulations on the book. I'd like to start off with how you became interested in this topic and why you wanted to write a book about it.
Well, I lived in the Tularosa Basin for a good number of years. I worked at the Daily News there, and that's how I became familiar with the Trinity site. It's not in the Tularosa Basin, but just outside of it. And we did a project with the newspaper on the 60th anniversary of the explosion, which happened on July 16th, 1945. It was a really good, fascinating project where we recreated the time in the newspaper and talked to many of the people that we could find that had been there at the time and had memories of the explosion.
Yeah, that's one of the things about this book I really enjoyed was that you have all of these accounts, these personal accounts of people from the area, officials that took part in the secret project as well, and also even people who were young kids at the time. They shared their memories in this book. So as we start this conversation off, I kind of want to talk with you a little bit about how New Mexico was during that time of World War II. Can you kind of paint us a picture about what the state was like in this region?
Yeah, southern New Mexico was a vast, wide territory of ranchers and livestock, small cities and small villages. People out there in the plains, they ran their cattle, they took care of things. They didn't have grocery stores to go to. They grew their own food, caught their own water in their own cisterns, might go down the street to the mercantile and pick up their staples, rice and flour, and that was about it. Everything else was self-contained.
Yeah, it's kind of it seems like it was a completely different world, and I guess in many ways it was. Can you share with us a little bit about the Manhattan Project, how it started, and really how many people are involved in it? And if you could also let us know just how many people were involved in it in this area.
So people from this area were really not involved at all. They didn't know, they had no clue what was going on. Mm-hmm. I'd say the Manhattan Project probably starts in the 30s, where people were understanding nuclear physics and fission and building on that. And then early in the 40s, the country became afraid, or the powers that be became worried, because the Germans were really developing nuclear technology, and so they decided they needed their own project to go forward, and that's what became the Manhattan Project.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think you mentioned in the book was the race that was happening at the time. There was a lot of pressure, obviously. with the advancements that Germany was making at the time. And you mentioned that a lot of people in this area, they didn't have a clue about what was going on. Most of the people didn't understand what was happening. And I was wondering, can you share with us a little bit about what people were saying was going on when you have all these folks being trucked in, and this equipment being trucked into the area? What were people being told in the area by the U.S. government that was going on?
They were really being told nothing. I mean, they did realize, they noticed that things were ramping up, that something was happening, but they were just living their lives and putting their trust in the powers that be.
I see. It seems like a completely different time than what we're experiencing right now when you talk about trust in the powers that be. Can you talk a little bit about that? During that time, so many people were trusting what they were being told by local officials and the government. How is that so different than what we experience now?
Well, there was not as many lines of communication. We have now a lot of, obviously, social media and newscasts, and I mean, they had radios maybe that they could sit and listen to for an hour a day or something like that. And there's also was fear going on, because there was fear that the outside world would come in and
kind of change everything, or
change everything, and put people in prisons. And it was a very American centralized situation. I mean, everybody was a patriot.
I see. Now, we talked today about a lot of misinformation that may be out there, confusing people with facts and data and science. What sorts of misinformation was going around to different communities when they first heard about this explosion that took place, the Trinity Test?
Well, the papers put out, they were told that there was a munitions dump out of the Alamogordo airfield that exploded. That's all they knew. That's all until August 6th, when the first bombs went off in Japan, and everybody then realized that New Mexico was where the first atomic bomb ever had gone off.
Yeah, you mentioned
they were not told anything.
You mentioned
they had people in the ready. They had trucks and stuff ready to take people out of the basin and out of the area in case something went wrong. They never used that.
Now, you mentioned earlier in the interview about the lack of media that was really in the area. People might have had a radio or just a few channels to listen to on the radio, perhaps. Can you kind of give us an understanding of how the media that was available, were they playing a role in the misinformation or keeping things a secret? Was there any of that happening?
Well, there was one journalist who had been hired by the government, who General Groves picked himself, that worked in New York, and he's the one that put out all the information. This is the person who wrote the press releases, who shared shared the timeline, who told the people what the government wanted them to hear, basically.
I see. Now, let's talk about the explosion, that early morning explosion that surprised so many in our region, so many people living on their properties out in rural New Mexico. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about that explosion and what people recalled hearing, and what counties were really in view of the explosion?
So in view, you would have Otero County, Socorro County, more counties a little north of that. a lot of reports just reported the colors, the oranges, the glows. Many people felt tremors and shaking of their houses. A bit to the north is where the wind was blowing, and so you would have you could see the ash in the air and the movement through the air. It was just I don't know. I can't describe how huge it was and how frightening it was to some people. Some people thought the world was ending, and they were sure that the angels had come for them, and it was their time to go.
Yeah, and to happen at such an early time in the morning before the sun has even risen in our part of the country, folks, I know in your book shared that the sky became like it was during the middle of the day for a little bit.
Yeah, the one of the most famous books written about it was called "The Day the Sun Rose Twice," which is just what happened.
I know there's so many different accounts, people sharing their personal memories, all different ages. What were some of your favorites or ones that really stood out to you of folks who have shared their memories in the year that you included in this book? Can you share with us some of those?
But there's a story from a young girl, or she's older now, obviously. She was 6 at the time, and she had an older brother, Bob, who had just been in the war. He was a teenager still, but he had been in the Philippines. And when the shaking started and all the hubbub started, he was quite sure that the enemy had come and was coming personally to attack the basin and the people there. And so he set everybody up with guns in the family household and put them at the windows. And the 2 little kids, Joy and her little brother, were told to go climb under the bed and hide under the bed. And they were a little mad because they weren't allowed to hold on to guns and protect themselves. So they decided they were going to throw oranges and nuts and apples because they found a box under the bed. So that was their plan for the invasion.
Wow. I mean, hearing it, I mean, it's a child's account, but I could obviously see how that could be very terrifying, especially bright and early in the morning and when you're not even quite awake yet. You also share stories from officials who were working on the test. Can you share some of those accounts about what officials with the Manhattan Project or with the Trinity Test later shared?
They all provided written accounts, which I suppose they were required to, but you could hear, even though it was written they could hear their own awe at what happened. You can hear how they described the explosion and the colors, and they talk about what happened that was supposed to happen and what didn't. And
yeah,
I don't know. It's just,
yeah, you bring up something that I think is interesting and what didn't happen. Obviously, we know it was a successful test with the atomic bomb, but were there some things that were supposed to happen that didn't?
Oh, there were things that they were afraid might happen that didn't, which thankfully, because some of them thought that the project might detonate the atmosphere and destroy the Earth. And
wow.
Yeah, they really didn't know.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of almost a blind shot. There was a lot of conjecture.
I see. Now, with this happening, how do you think this changed the region and how important and strategic this part of the country is to the United States?
This part of the country certainly remains extremely important to the United States. White Sands Missile Range is key in they keep there's massive amount of airspace that's available, that they keep it clear and for experimentation, and there's no way to know how much is actually going on out there.
Yeah. Every year, people usually have the opportunity to go visit the Trinity site. Can you share with us a little bit about what it's like to go out there and see that site, and what were some of your own experiences while putting this book together that you're able to share with folks?
Well, it's way out in the middle of nowhere, which is why they chose that site. They needed a flat, wide, huge space where there wouldn't cause a lot of human damage or human community disruption. And so you go out in the middle of this space. You're in the middle of a desert on a flat area. You can see the bunkers. There's some of the bunkers still out there. There's the wide space where the bomb actually went off with a huge black obelisk. They usually have tables with books on them, and they have a little information area where they have the trinitite where you can see it, and they have Geiger counters. You can do hands-on and try different objects, not only radio. I mean, they show you like how radioactive is a banana versus existing piece of trinitite or something. And they talk about how dangerous, or how right now how non-effective the radiation is for people. They also let you into the McDonald Schmidt Ranch House, which is where they assembled the plutonium core of the bomb and put everything together.
Wow. A lot has been made since the bomb dropped about how, or was detonated here in southern New Mexico, about how it was impacting the health of people at the time. Can you tell us a little bit about what's been said and how people have shared how their health has been impacted and their family's health has been impacted by this explosion, and what do we know so far?
There's a group called the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium, and they have been basically they came together in 2005, and ever since have been lobbying and reaching out to prove and to ask for some recognition and maybe some compensation for the damage that's been done to their families and their communities over the period of time, and even at the time as the radiation flowed downwind of the event. So downwind is north, so it's really up, like toward Socorro and Oscuro and many of the areas to the north, Carrizozo.
Yeah, I heard stories in your book. Some people associated with the group and in the area said that many people in the area used to live well into their 90s, but after this explosion, that stopped happening. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Well, there's horrific family accounts where there's one especially that they collected that's in the book from a woman who she just lists off her family members who experienced different types of cancer, different things happening, and they're down the ages. She just has a list of so-and-so died of this at this age, I had cancer at this age, I survived it. It's just a huge list, and they're connecting all that with the event, with the Trinity event.
So what do we know about what sort of research has been done examining this claim and really how big of an impact the radiation may have had on communities in the area?
There's some contradictory studies. There's a study out that talks about infant mortality at the time. It would seem that children who were in utero at the time, many of them did not survive birth or died soon after birth. On the opposite side, there's I think it's the American Cancer Institute, who have just completed a 7-year study, and they've confirmed that the radiation affected people and families at the time of the radiation, and people who were in the areas. They have not found any proof that says that it's a multi-generational problem.
I see. Now, these claims have found their way to Washington, D.C., where some federal lawmakers have voiced their concern and also pushed for some legislation to help these families out, provide some sort of relief. What can you tell us about what's been done so far to possibly assist people?
Well, there's the other states have been compensated for nuclear testing, and then the downwinders in Utah, downwinders in Nevada have received fair amounts of, like large amounts of compensatory money. The legislation here, the downwinders have been lobbying for a long time, and they've done a lot of firsthand examination of events, but the legislation still has not gone through. So they still haven't been recognized or compensated for anything that happened down here.
Now, I know there's been a lot of people sharing their thoughts about this test ushering in a whole new world, the atomic age, and how it changed our lives. But there was also some folks who were responsible for this test and explosion who had mixed feelings about the impact that their work left on the world. Can you tell us what some of those people were and some of their thoughts that they shared?
So there's the whole coalition of scientists who wrote a letter that basically asked for this weapon not to ever be used, and they looked at what had happened, and many were dismayed and angered and upset. Obviously, all the human lives that were lost in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But there are still many of the people, especially just the people that I talk to, the common people in the basin and in the area, who deeply believe that this is what had to happen, and that it saved hundreds of thousands of American lives, and it put an end to the war. So there's no way to know. I mean,
yeah, there's obviously a lot of different views, and it's a complicated one, but I want to hear a little bit from you about doing all this research on this test. What are your thoughts now that the book is out and you've been able to think about and process your work and your research that you've done? How do you feel that the Trinity test changed our world?
I think the Trinity test itself worked on southern New Mexico and offered an understanding of the bigger world around us. I don't know, it's just so big. It's such a huge issue. It's hard to consolidate it into a little explanation. It's obviously, it changed the whole world the understanding of the world that things could just end, that you could be sitting in one moment in your home, teaching your kids, helping them with their homework, and then the next minute you could be a little bit of dust on the ground. And it's just something that we've all learned to live and grow up with. But prior to that moment, it was not an understanding that existed.
I see. Well, Elva, I want to thank you so much for sharing your work with us and taking the time to talk with us. Elva Österreich is a journalist and author of the new book, The Manhattan Project Trinity Test, Witnessing the Bomb in New Mexico. Elva, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Anthony.
And we want to thank you for joining us for Fronteras, Changing America. Remember, you can always send us your thoughts by email to feedback@nmsu.edu. We're always looking for story ideas, and you can stay updated with the latest news anytime at krwg.org. We'll see you next time.